In this video, I'll be showing you how to create a gasket using a sheet of gasket material. With precision, patience, the proper tools, and the proper materials, you can make a functioning gasket. I'll be using two different methods to create gaskets. One will be to create a gasket from scratch, and the other will be to trace the old gasket. I'll now show you how to create a gasket from scratch. The materials I'll be using are a piece of cardboard to work on, a pen for tracing, a precision knife for cutting out the gasket, a rag to soak up oil, clean engine oil, and the gasket material. When choosing a gasket material, you should use whatever the part came stock with, or a suitable type of gasket material for your application. You should also make sure that you have the proper thickness. For some applications it won't be so important to have the proper thickness, but it's usually best to use whatever the application calls for. In my case, I'm supposed to be using gasket paper which is 0.3 millimeter thick. This is 1/64th of an inch thick, so it's more around 0.4 of a millimeter, but it's close enough. Alright, so now I'm going to spread out the gasket material. When you first open it up, it's going to be like this. It's not going to be flat. So it's a good idea to reverse it to kind of help it come out straighter. Make sure you don't crease it. If you crease it, it'll improvise the strength of the material, and that can cause gasket failure. Now that I have the gasket material spread out flat on the piece of cardboard, I now have to prep the surface of the part. First, you should make sure that the entire part is nice and clean and free of oil and dirt and all those sort of things. Next, we're going to have to clean the mating surface, because there may be some of the old gasket stuck to it, and you need it to be completely flat and smooth. I'm going to be using a razor blade to clean the surface. You also may be able to use a fine grit sandpaper. If you use a razor blade, just very carefully go around the entire surface and make sure that you keep the razor blade flat on the surface. Don't let it go to the side. Have it completely flat, and don't apply too much pressure. On some surfaces like aluminum and surfaces such as that, it can be pretty easy to damage the surface if you apply pressure and you make a notch in it or a chip comes out. After you have the mating surface clean, wipe it down with a rag to remove any contaminants. After that, you'll be ready to trace the part. So now I'm going to place it down on the gasket material. And when you place the part down, you want to conserve as much of the gasket material as possible. So instead of placing it this way, I'm going to place it like this, and that'll give me more space on the gasket material in case I make a mistake and need to do it over, or if I need to trace other parts. So now to trace it, I'm going to get the pen and simply touch the pen to the edge and just mark around the entire thing. Now that I have the outside of the part traced, I'm ready to stamp the gasket material. To do this, I'm going to apply a thin coat of oil to the mating surface of the part, and then I'm going to align the part as best as I can with the line I traced, and now I'm going to place it down and apply pressure. I'm going to apply pressure to different points so that the oil can make contact with the gasket material and it can leave me a good oil print. Now it's time to apply the oil. I poured a little bit of oil inside of the oil cap, and now I'm just going to dab my finger in it and apply it to the entire surface. Alright, so now I have oil applied to the entire surface. So now I'm just gonna wipe my hands off and I'm ready to stamp. When you apply the oil, you gotta make sure you put enough, because if you don't put enough, when you stamp it you may not have a clear marking. You also don't want to put too much, because if you put too much, then when you stamp it, the oil may overrun and make a bigger imprint than what should be there. So now I have to very carefully place this onto the gasket material. I'm also I have a lot of excess oil around the edges, so I'm just gonna wipe around the edges a bit. Alright, now when you stamp this, make sure that you line it up very carefully. Now there's a nice imprint of the oil around the entire surface. So the next step is going to be to trace a line on the outside of the oil print. Just like that. Do it around the entire inside. And also for the screw holes, circle them so that you'll know where to cut them out at. And you should try to do this somewhat quickly in case the oil starts to absorb into the material and it'll make a bigger imprint than what you need. Now that I have all the holes and the inside of the gasket traced, now I have to soak up the oil with the rag. To do that, I'm just going to place it over and apply pressure, and that'll soak up the oil. Now that I've removed the oil, it's time for the most tedious and important part of making the gasket: cutting it out. This is an extremely delicate process. You must have a lot of patience and a lot of precision to cut this out properly. If you accidentally slip and slice the gasket, then it will most likely be no good and you'll have to start over again. So you must use a lot of patience when doing this. Do not rush. The hardest parts will be cutting out the holes and cutting out tight areas. For the holes, if you have a hole puncher, you may be able to just punch out the holes and it'll be as simple as that. I'm going to be cutting out the holes with the precision knife. And to do that, you just have to go around the entire area and cut very carefully. So just place the precision knife on the line and just cut out, and that's it. Just cut out the line. I now have my gasket cut out. Another thing I'd like to mention is, before you cut out your gasket, you should either look at your old gasket if you have it, or look at a picture of your gasket on the internet or wherever you can get a picture from, to make sure that you have the proper form. The reason I say this is because the stock gasket might not be exactly as the part is formed. To give an example, I had this piece which went right here, I believe, which was for right here, And when I looked at a picture, I realized that it didn't need this part because the stock gasket doesn't have that, so I just cut that out. The next step will be to place the gasket on the part, and then we're going to use the old screws and line up the gasket and pop the screws through the gasket. Alright, with the screws through the gasket and the gasket placed on the part, I can make sure that the gasket goes around the entire surface to ensure that there'll be a good seal. I can see that it's fitting properly around the entire part, but one thing I see is that these holes aren't cut big enough. So all I'm going to do is use the precision knife to very carefully cut around the edge, and that'll allow the hole to be big enough for the little pin to fit through that goes there. Now the hole's the proper size. All I have to do is do it to this last hole and the gasket will be complete. I'll now show you how to create a gasket by tracing the old gasket. This is much easier to do than creating a gasket from scratch. All you have to do is trace the outside of the gasket, the inside, and the holes. After that, you cut the gasket out and that's it. I'm now going to attempt to punch out the holes using a bullet shell. This is a 30-06 and the end happens to be the same size as the hole. So I'm simply going to place it on the gasket and hit it firmly with the hammer. And there it is. Now I'm just gonna cut out the rest of the gasket and I'll be done. I'm now done cutting out the gasket and I'm all finished. The methods used in this video may not work in all situations, but it should work in most cases. I hope this video helps you, and thanks for watching.